What if your real estate agent was a murderer? Well, this real estate agent was found with over 50 weapons in his home last week after shooting 3 people, including an elderly couple. To make it even crazier, he did all this in broad daylight at about 1 to 2 p.m. This happened on January 10th. The guy just went on a shooting spree. David Lever is the real estate agent behind me that went on his murder spree. One of the sons of the victims held Lever at gunpoint and called the police until they arrived. He then explained that Lever killed both of his parents. The last victim was apparently an associate of Lever as well. Lever admitted to the son that he killed the 2 parents, and it was very clear that he was on some sort of substance because of his history of substance abuse. He wasn't in the right state of mind is basically what the entire report said. It is still unclear on why he even shot the elderly couple. They weren't even doing anything. They were 76 and 80. Also, he called the judge an MF during the hearing. I think that's the one thing you probably shouldn't do. He's probably going to go to prison for a long time. I'm guessing life. Imagine being one of his clients, saying no to a house he showed you, and then you get him knocking on your window at 2 a.m. That's terrifying. Now, obviously, the crimes, like I said, happened in broad daylight, so this guy is wild. This happened in Greenville, North Carolina. So, let me know your thoughts.
This woman was killed by an umbrella at the beach. Lodi Michelle Beck's tragic death occurred on a bright June day in 2016, as she celebrated her 55th birthday and wedding anniversary with loved ones at Virginia Beach. While the atmosphere was festive, an ominous change in the weather brought strong, unpredictable gusts of wind sweeping across the shore. One of these powerful gusts tore a beach umbrella from its anchoring in the sand. The umbrella, with its pointed end exposed, became an airborne weapon, flying uncontrollably across the crowded beach. Tragically, its flight ended when it struck Lodi with a devastating force. The umbrella's metal tip impaled her directly in the chest, causing catastrophic injuries. Witnesses described the scene as surreal and horrifying. Lodi collapsed to the ground as beachgoers rushed to her aid. Many were too shocked to act, frozen by the unexpected violence of the incident. Emergency personnel were called immediately, and first responders worked tirelessly to save her. But despite their best efforts, the trauma was too severe, and Lodi was pronounced dead at the hospital. A beach umbrella, a benign and common sight on any summer day, transformed into an instrument of death. This remains a chilling reminder of the unpredictable and sometimes violent force of nature.
The man behind me just tried to buy a baby for $500,000 to harvest its organs. And the cherry on top, he got charged earlier that week for shooting a semi-truck driver in the leg. Behind me is 21-year-old Jose Terran. This happened in San Antonio, Texas. Now, apparently on the baby situation, he got added to a group chat because the uncle of the family changed his number. He wasn't related to anyone in the family, to be clear, but they started texting about the baptism of their 9-year-old that's happening soon. He said, "That's a nice Caucasian baby." I know, that's a crazy sentence to say. Then he asked, "How much for it? I want its organs." When confronted by police about this, he said, "I thought this was a spam group text and I just wanted to mess with them and troll them." But I don't know, he went on to leak the family's address, where the baptism would be in the church and everything, and saying that he would show up. And he kept calling them multiple times. So I mean, that's not looking good on top of the road rage shooting he had earlier that week. And this all of course happened right before New Year's, the best time for all of this to happen. He got charged with the aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, of course, for shooting the truck driver in the leg. Luckily, the truck driver lived and is okay. He went to the hospital for treatment. And then of course, he got charged with the solicitation of trying to buy a human and harvest their organs and sale of organs. It was a crazy charge, but holy crap, this guy's probably gonna go to prison for a long time. Let me know your thoughts about this.
This little girl vanished, and her chilling final phone call is absolutely terrifying. Her presumed fate is like something from a nightmare. It was the 6th of April, 1986 in New Mexico when a small town was shocked by some horrifying news. 9-year-old Antoinette Cayedido had vanished in the middle of the night. Her mum was devastated to find that at 7 a.m. when she went into her bedroom, she was nowhere to be found. The little girl was actually always really responsible, and she was said to be very wise beyond her years, so there's no way she would just vanish on her own accord. Her mum Penny frantically ran round neighbours' houses asking if they'd heard anything or seen the little girl. When she had no luck, police were alerted. They scoured the area too and could find absolutely nothing. Straight away, investigators knew this screamed of a kidnap. Penny told officers that a local man named Emiliano Gardella, nicknamed Emo, had given the little girl flowers 3 times up until she vanished. He was questioned but denied any involvement. A man named Ron Perry, who knew the little girl's mum Penny, told police that at around 3:30 a.m. he'd actually knocked on the door of the family home and on a bedroom window. He said that he did this because he and Penny had had an argument and he wanted to just check on her and make sure she was okay. He said that he then left and spent the night at a friend's house who lived down the street, and the friend actually corroborated this story. Months went by and Antoinette's heartbroken family had to go on with absolutely no idea of what had happened to her. Finally, when all seemed lost and a year had gone by, police received a very chaotic phone call. A child was on the other end of the line claiming to be the missing girl. She said that she was in Albuquerque, but before police could get any more information, they heard a man shouting at her and the line suddenly went dead. Officers played Penny the recording and she stated, "I listened to that tape over and over and over, and just by the way she says her last name and the way she screamed sent chills all over my body. A mother knows, and I know that was her." Then 4 years later, there was a possible sighting of the little girl in Nevada. A waitress had been waiting on a table of a scruffy couple with a young girl. The waitress said that the little girl had strangely kind of dropped a utensil on the floor and it seemed to have been done on purpose, but she didn't think too much of it until the little girl actually put her hand on the waitress's hand. Again, she kind of didn't think too much of it and just went into the back. Then, after the three of them had left the restaurant, the waitress went over to clear the table and found a note. It said, "Please help me call the police." Obviously, by that point, the three had gone. Then years later, one of Antoinette's sisters was interviewed and she actually said that she'd witnessed her getting abducted. She hadn't initially been interviewed because she was only 5 years old at the time. Two men had apparently forced Antoinette into a brown van, and because this little girl was only small at the time, she said that she didn't tell anyone about this because she didn't want to upset her mum. Then the mum Penny's story changed dramatically. She admitted to having heard a knock at the door and having told Antoinette to go and answer it, and then said that about half an hour passed and she realised Antoinette hadn't come back. This was very different to her original story, which was that she just found in the morning around 7 a.m. that Antoinette wasn't there. She never said anything about making the little girl in the middle of the night go and answer the door. She then also said something extremely incriminating to the FBI. She said, "What if me and Emo did this? Would we both go to prison?" She apparently admitted to knowing who was going to come and take her daughter, as well as having kind of planned it and having told her to open the door, like she said. Despite this, she was never charged and she passed away.
Bizarre prehistoric humanoids were spotted emerging from a cave in Thailand, astonishing everyone around, as they had never been seen in the region before. This cave is surrounded by an ancient legend that describes it as a secret passage to the hollow earth, a mysterious world at the planet's core. According to the legend, prehistoric beings like dinosaurs and hominids, who never evolved like surface humans, inhabit this inner world. These humanoids, with yellowish skin and covered in hair, played an instrument resembling a harmonica, suggesting a form of communication or even their own culture, indicating impressive intelligence. The phenomenon was brief. Within minutes, they vanished, leaving locals intrigued and fueling further theories about the hollow Earth's existence. Researchers gathered and decided to enter the cave to collect information and try to unravel this mystery. After days of boat travel, they reached the possible cave entrance. What they saw left them speechless. Do these beings really exist? Is the theory valid? Share your thoughts in the comments and type Terra for part 2. Bizarre prehistoric humanoids were spotted emerging from a cave in Thailand, astonishing everyone around, as they had never been seen in the region before. Part 2. This cave is surrounded by an ancient legend that describes it as a secret passage to the hollow earth, a mysterious world at the planet's core. Upon entering the cave, researchers encountered a vast network of tunnels illuminated by glowing crystals that seemed to pulse with their own energy. As they progressed, they found signs of civilization, symbols carved into the walls, primitive tools, and bones of creatures unlike anything known. The atmosphere was dense, and distant sounds echoed, as if something was watching them. After hours of exploration, they reached a massive chamber where they saw the humanoids again. They were gathered around a structure resembling an altar, playing their harmonica-like instruments and emitting harmonic sounds. The researchers realized they were facing a complex and organized society, just as they had imagined. The discovery was astonishing and shook the foundations of science. Could the legend of the Hollow Earth be more than just a story? Do you believe it? Share your thoughts in the comments.
Abby and Zoe were best friends enjoying a quiet evening together. Abby's laughter echoed through the room as she sipped her wine. Zoe's 2-year-old son played on the floor, his tiny hands rummaging through his mother's purse. As Zoe stepped away to use the bathroom, Abby turned her attention to the boy. "What are you playing with, little man?" she asked, smiling. The toddler giggled innocently, his hands fumbling through lipstick and keys until they landed on something cold and metallic. It was a gun. The tiny boy, oblivious to the danger, began waving the handgun around, pointing it at Abby. Her heart sank and panic filled her voice. "Put that down, sweetie. That's not a toy," she pleaded. Her voice trembling, but he didn't understand. And then, the single shot echoed through the house. Abby's lifeless body slumped to the floor, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Blood covered the entire floor. Hearing the shot, Zoe sprinted back into the room. The sight before her was a nightmare, her best friend motionless in a growing pool of blood. Her son still playing with the gun as though nothing had happened. With shaking hands, Zoe snatched the gun from her son, tears streaming down her face. She called 911, choking on her words as she explained the unthinkable tragedy. The authorities arrived, but nothing could undo what had just been done. One innocent moment of a child's curiosity had turned into an unimaginable tragedy.
This woman's daring escape led to the cold case murders of 4 other women being solved. This is the story of the Highway Hunter. In 1997, Sandra Sepa behind me was using a payphone. She noticed a man weirdly staring at her, so she got in her vehicle and quickly left. Weirdly enough, she got a flat tire while driving, so she pulled over to a diner to inspect. Out of nowhere, that same man appeared. He offered to help her, but she was kind of cautious about this. She reluctantly let him look and inspect her tire for her, and he asked her to go to his truck and look for a jack. While she was at the truck, he threatened her with a knife to get into the truck. As he drove off with her, she decided to jump out into the middle of the road after a few minutes. She landed hard on the ground, and spooked by the escape, the guy decided to keep driving off. People nearby noticed her, police came quickly and took her to the hospital. She gave them a good description of the truck and the attacker. This eventually led to the attacker being found and being linked to 4 other victims' cases. The attacker's name was William Lewis Reese. The way he got the name Highway Hunter is because he used the highways in Texas and Oklahoma to flee from the victims and get far away from the evidence. William Reese was released from prison in 1996, and in 1997 he started committing more and more crimes. Originally, he was put in prison for the sexual assault of 2 women, so when he got out of prison, he decided to just start murdering people. His first victim was a 12-year-old ballerina who went for a morning jog. William Reese Lewis became the first suspect, however, they didn't have any evidence to convict him. Sandra Sepa was the second victim, however, she got away. Kelly Cox was the next person to be a victim. She was a 20-year-old. She called her boyfriend to come pick her up. When he came there, she was nowhere to be found, and she failed to pick up her child from daycare. Then the next victim was Tiffany Johnston. She disappeared in broad daylight at a car wash. Her mats were still hanging and drying at the time, too. Her body was found later on the interstate that was 15 miles away from the car wash. She was strangled and essayed, however, they couldn't get enough DNA to actually outline a suspect. The next victim was Jessica Kane, a 17-year-old who was out past her curfew that sent her father looking for her. 5 months after Sandra Sepa's abduction, she got called forward by the police. Her description of the truck matched up to what they were looking for in the original case with the 12-year-old ballerina. They asked her to pick the man out of a lineup of suspects, and she correctly picked William Lewis Reese. William Lewis Reese would end up confessing to all 4 murders. Jessica Kane's body would be found almost 20 years later in 2016. Then Kelly Cox's remains were found in 2016 as well. His trial for Tiffany Johnston's death was in May of 2021. The trial was 9 days long, and in less than 2 hours after that ended, they found him guilty. He was sentenced to death. However, because of appeals and all of that stuff and the different trials, he has not been sentenced to death yet, but he is facing a life imprisonment.
I'm all they have. Right now, they have not been able to rule anyone out. I don't think I'm any more of a suspect than anyone in this case right now.
It's very painful.
The woman you just saw in that video, Susan Smith, murdered both of her children in the year 1994. Now, this case eerily echoes a more recent case, the Chris Watts case, and that's because Susan Smith murdered her 2 children and then went on national TV begging for someone to come forward with answers about what happened to her kids. Yes, that clip at the beginning was Susan and her husband David, and she was on television stating she had no idea what happened to her kids. However, it was eventually discovered that Susan had parked near a lake, John D. Long Lake, and allowed her car to roll into the lake containing her 2 young children, Michael and Alex. Tragically, the boys were trapped in the car as the water submerged them, and that's unfortunately how they both died, terrified, screaming, and alone in the dark. Now, Susan initially claimed that she was carjacked by a black man, but Susan's story didn't make sense. She said that she had stopped her car at a red light at an empty intersection. However, it was later determined that that light would only turn red if there was another car present, so she had been lying. And eventually, after making dramatic pleas on national television for 9 days, Susan Smith admitted that she was the one who murdered her own 2 children. To this day, Susan Smith continues to try to get out of prison, but thankfully her attempts to get herself released keep getting blocked. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms, and we actually did an episode on Susan Smith with the full story, and we were actually featured on Nightline recently because of our efforts covering this case.
Her car was found abandoned and she had vanished. There's a bunch of suspicious circumstances in this case, and things only got more intriguing when a second girl disappeared. Brianna Maitland was described by her loved ones as bubbly, free-spirited, and charismatic. She grew up on a farm in Franklin, Vermont, and lived a very small town life. Now, it suited her when she was younger and obviously growing up, but when she turned 17 in October 2003, she made a big decision. She wanted to move away to be more independent, so decided to enroll at a high school in Ennisburg. She tried a few different living arrangements before eventually settling down. This was at the end of February 2004 when she moved in with her friend Jillian Stout. She actually dropped out of high school at this point, but she knew education was really important, so she enrolled in a GED program. It was around this kind of time when she attended a party with a bunch of girls that she knew. A fight ended up breaking out between her and a girl called Keely LaCrosse, who Brianna used to be friends with. It's thought that this fight was over a guy, and this Keely had thought that Brianna had stolen her boyfriend. It was such a brutal physical fight, and Keely had punched Brianna several times in the face, even breaking her nose. Brianna would actually file charges against Keely for the vicious attack. However, before there was any kind of resolution to this, Brianna would vanish. It was the morning of the 19th of March, and Brianna finished taking an exam, and her mum decided to go out to celebrate. We went out for some lunch and then did a bit of shopping, and Brianna actually had a part-time job to go to that evening. This job was at the Black Lantern Inn in Montgomery. Brianna's mum actually noticed that she did seem a little bit agitated and unsettled during the day, but she didn't know whether this was just because she'd just taken an exam. She apparently showed up to her shift as planned, and her colleagues said that there was nothing of note that happened on the shift. It was completely normal. At around 11:20 p.m. she finished work, and a colleague saw her driving out of the car park on her own in her car. She's never been seen to this day. Brianna was actually due to head back home to where she lived with Jillian, but she didn't return. Between 11:30 and 12:30 that night, a witness spotted Brianna's car backed into an abandoned farmhouse at an odd angle. The witness said that the headlights may have been on. Then, in the early hours of the morning, Brianna's ex-boyfriend, James Robertiel, drove by again and spotted the car, but his story kind of changes. He said that he had been drinking, so maybe this was why, but he said he pulled over, saw no one was there, and noticed the headlights were on and the doors were open, so the front driver's side of the door and the passenger's door. He said that he may have turned off the lights and shut the doors and drove off because he didn't want to get in trouble. The following day, a member of the public reported the car there, and like the witnesses said, it was parked at this kind of weird angle and seemed to be kind of up a little bit, but it didn't really look like there was much evidence of like an actual crash. The rear bumper was kind of stuck on the foundation of the house. Police showed up and there was no sign of anyone there, but what there was in the vehicle was a water bottle, some loose change, and also some unopened paychecks of Brianna's. Now, this gave the officer a little bit of a clue as to who the car might belong to, so he did head over to Brianna's place of work to ask them, but it was closed up. So eventually he just towed the car. Prior to that though, passers-by had noticed the car, and because it was like so strange, it was just such an odd scene, they'd stopped and taken pictures. Very interestingly, there seemed to be a broken necklace nearby which belonged to Brianna. It wasn't until a couple of days later when Brianna's parents reported her missing. Now, there was a slight delay because, as I said, she was living with this friend, Gillian, and Gillian had actually been away during the period of time when Brianna didn't come home, so she hadn't noticed that she hadn't come home. When Brianna was reported missing, her car details were given in, so obviously they then were like, oh my god, this car had been towed. This was very disturbing for the family. Why would Brianna just leave her unopened paychecks in the car? Police got canine teams involved, but unfortunately nothing was found. Strangely, Brianna's dad, Bruce, got an anonymous tip weeks later. He heard she was being held captive in a farmhouse in Berkshire, 10 miles away from where her car was found. Raymond Ryans and Nathaniel Jackson were two substance dealers who rented that farmhouse and were apparently known to Brianna. Police raided the property and found no evidence that she was ever there, but they did find weapons and substances. The pair were arrested and later released. But then there was a twist. Months later, a woman named Legia Ray Collins, who was an acquaintance of Raymond, disappeared on the 4th of July 2004. Now, in the end, a woman named Ellen DeCharme confessed to murdering that woman over substance money, and some believe there may be a link between the two cases. The ex-boyfriend James aroused suspicion, but he actually passed away in a car accident years later. There are hopes that potentially DNA samples could eventually solve this case, but as of today, it still remains unsolved.